Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Simpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on simpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode. Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Rick Parnell. Rick is the CEO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. Rick has over 25 years of experience leading nonprofit organizations. He has worked in strategic roles at the United Nations Foundation, where his team mobilized over $2.2 billion in funding to help solve a range of global challenges, including climate deterioration. Rick is leveraging his skills to restore the climate for future generations. The Foundation for Climate Restoration works with technology entrepreneurs, investors, companies, scientists, faith leaders, governments, NGOs, and citizens globally to advance the use of commercially viable carbon renewable technologies. Rick will discuss global efforts that the Foundation is leading to achieve net negative emissions by 2050. Hey, Rick, welcome to the show.
Hey, Doug, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Looking forward to this conversation, learning what the third pillar is all about. But before we jump into that, I'm checking in with folks. What's COVID-19 meant for you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so COVID-19, we can talk a little bit about the lessons learned for climate and climate restoration. But we quickly, like everyone, we had to go into some pretty deep strategic planning and move everything to virtual. I'm actually, we're pleasantly surprised at how much we're able to get done. I think many people have said this before. The intimacy that Zoom and some of these platforms provide for these kinds of conversations has been just a game changer. But yeah, like everyone, I mean, it's really hard. It's a struggle, and it just tears you apart to see how many people are going through such suffering right now.
Well, that's true. And, let's just jump into the work that you're doing. And I don't know if you heard that one of your board members, I think she's a board member, Sandra Kwok, came on Simpatico last week. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, no, she's great. Yeah. She's great, isn't she?
It was a great conversation. So, we're double dipping in your foundation in just a 2-week period. So,
well, thank you.
All right, let's just talk more broadly, though. What is climate restoration? You don't necessarily hear that term, those two words together that often.
Yeah, sure. So, it was new to me about 2 years ago when I first started working on it. And, having been in the climate space for about 20 years, it's simply put, it's the idea that while it's important to do mitigation adaptation, no question, and renewables are here to stay. But we have legacy carbon in the atmosphere of the past 200 or so years. And so our goal in climate restoration is to remove the trillion tons of atmospheric CO2 and get us back to the pre-industrial level. So we are building a movement. We think that we're the first organization globally to take on climate restoration, but it's also a way for people to engage, feel positive, and actually work on some of these different solutions. So our goal is to have the world on a path by 2030 for full restoration. Again, removing of the legacy carbon and getting us back to under 300 parts per million by the year 2050. Now, I know that people are watching and they're going to say, under 300 parts per million, that's incredibly aggressive. Yes, it is. But humanity for thousands of years has survived and thrived at under 300 parts. And so for us, it's just, let's just go for the gold, but let's just go for everything.
All right, I think just even bending the curve, like the Keeling curve, if you can just even get that to go down for a year or two, that would be just this worldwide celebration. But by 2050, you want to get it below 300. That is ambitious.
Yeah. Now we have several partners, and one of my dear friends and partners, Sir David King at the Cambridge Center for Climate Repair, he says, Rick, 350. And I said, but David, let's go for 300. And so, we always joke about it. It's like, okay, well, if we can get under 350 and we end up at 325, I'll take it. That's great. But, let's really go for the full sustainability for humanity.
Okay, so I have heard about taking carbon out of the atmosphere, but to be this aggressive in doing that, what are some of the solutions and technologies that you're promoting with the foundation?
Yeah, I mean, for us, let me just say that for us, it needs to be a permanent solution. It needs to be a scalable solution and a financeable solution. And so what that means is that you look mostly to the private markets first. So things like carbon negative concrete. A couple of years ago, this was an idea. Now there are literally buildings that are being built with carbon removal. It's a process that there's, I think, 3 or 4 different concrete companies around the world that have been working on this, that is now ready to scale, where you remove carbon from the atmosphere and turn it into synthetic limestone, and then you build your building. Our approach is that we're not going to stop some of these forms of development, so we need to do them in a way that will remove the carbon from the atmosphere. The oceans are a huge carbon sink. I mean, kelp grows at something like 3 feet a day, and that's a food source. It has a market, and it removes carbon. So people forget that carbon, much like we plant a tree on land, there are all kinds of things like kelp under the ocean that absorb carbon, grow rapidly, and they don't deteriorate in the same kind of way and release carbon that they do on land. So again, looking at it from a market approach and trying to grow the space so that people can have more conversations about what is climate restoration and how do we get the carbon out of the air, what are the solutions to the air. And we're finding constantly that there are investors that can't find entrepreneurs that can't find investors. There's solutions that people are skeptical about. For us, our mantra is let's test, test, test. So we want to get this, sort of out into the open space, into the light of day, so that from the UN to private companies are talking about climate restoration and really doing full restoration.
Okay, so the example of kelp, I'm just curious, when you'd mentioned scalability is one of the key things that you need to factor in.
Right.
Well, do you guys kind of get into that level? You're not going to be out there planting kelp, but are you working with partners? Are you working with countries to sort of say you have X amount of space that you could potentially plant these things?
Yeah, and let me just be clear, because if anybody that knows me that's watching, it's like, Rick is an expert on kelp. No, Rick is not an expert on kelp. But what Rick does know is that there are entrepreneurs that have figured out how to make a market for kelp, that it can be food, human food, but it also can be feedstock. It can do beauty products. There's all kinds of things to be able to grow. It's just one example, but be able to grow those kinds of markets. We think that if fisheries were restored, there's an estimate that if 2% of the world's oceans were fully restored, that would sink a vast majority of the carbon that we need to get out of the atmosphere. So it's that kind of I do not believe that by any stretch that there are silver bullets. No way. But this will be a tapestry that we will weave together, hopefully over the next 30 years, of different solutions, natural solutions, technological solutions, technological solutions that must be tested. As I brought up my friend Sir David at the Center for Climate Repair, their goal is to have testing centers around the world that test these kinds of solutions to ensure safety and then be able to deploy in local markets. So yeah, no, I mean, I'm very excited about some of these different kinds of things that are coming online.
Okay, so technology, and I think the concrete was an example of that. But
Right.
what about geoengineering? Is that part of the mix with what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that geoengineering has become a term. It's in the lexicon now, and it gets, I would say, in its current state, it gets a little bit of a bad rap. If there are solutions that we should potentially test first and get the kinks out and then try them, isn't that better than doing nothing at all? Again, the I think little known truth is that when we get to 2050 and we get to net zero, and look at all the companies that are coming online talking about net zero and making these pledges, and it's fantastic. However, 200 years of legacy carbon will still be in the atmosphere. So where will we be in 2050 if we only reach net zero, which again, critically important. We got to stop pumping it up there, but we've also got to get it out. So, if you think of it in terms of, my mother actually loves this one. It helps her tell her friends about climate restoration. If you think about that, the Earth has been sitting in a bathtub of carbon, and at an appropriate level for however many millions of years, and then the Industrial Revolution comes along, and suddenly we turn on the faucet of carbon, and the tub is just overflowing. Well, we get to net zero, we've turned the faucet off. Fantastic. But the earth is still drowning. So how do we get the plug out? How do we pull the drain? We do it, we think, through some of these kinds of solutions. Governments may come online eventually and get behind some of these different restoration solutions and carbon removal. But right now, the market could move much faster.
Okay, I got a question from the community chat here from Ken. How much carbon needs to be removed annually on average? Do you have a model in mind? X amount in 2031, two times amount in 2032, and so on. And how do you see this playing out in an ideal scenario? So if you've mapped out to 2050, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, roughly 25 gigatons a year of CO2 would be ideal. If we have solutions that are doing that, then we can get there.
And do you have sort of like a temporal approach too? It's like we know with the technology and everything for these first 10 years, it's going to be like, okay, well, we know that these technologies exist, but hopefully within 20 years, these other things are going to kind of come online. The research take you there yet, or is it still too early?
Yeah, I mean, some of the research is still early, but what I will say is that there are, again, we do not believe in a silver bullet. But if you look at some of the different solutions, the concrete market alone, the building materials market alone, if you built at scale the kinds of concrete plants around the world to remove the carbon, you could get it all done in one industry. If every single location was doing carbon negative concrete, well, that's not going to happen. So, okay, so how much of that, how fast can that market grow that maybe that takes care of 10, 15% of the problem in the first year? Meanwhile, you're doing some of the kelp markets. Meanwhile, you're doing some of these, other building materials. So, and as these come online, I mean, I'm constantly surprised. Not all of them are climate restoration solutions, but I'm constantly surprised that I run in all the time to people that, oh, I have this new product that's all natural that removes methane from the cow, 80% of the methane from the cow. It's like, okay, well, let's weave that into pieces of it. And so I think that if you did the modeling out on each one of the different industries and then look at the different blending of it, that it's possible to get there. I will say over and over again, it's unbelievably aggressive. But looking at some of the people, we have some youth ambassadors on our team that are 18, 19-year-old and they're headed off to college. So when you think about it, 30 years from now, they'll be my age. So I would really hope that we have aggressively worked to remove the carbon and restore the climate by the time they're, reaching their 50s.
All right, now I find this interesting, like the relationship of climate restoration to climate mitigation and adaptation. Adaptation and mitigation seems to have gotten all the attention and never thought of it as being this third pillar, but how do you fit in and kind of being at that equal level?
Yeah, no, and I would say we're not at the equal level yet, and we need to be. And again, I cannot underscore enough mitigation, adaptation, critical. But it was 2 degrees, and then it was 1.5 in Paris, and so we've had this evolution. Now, I mean, a few years ago, nobody talked about net zero, and now people are all talking about net zero. So I just think it's part of the evolution process. But for us, the role of the foundation is to try and bring awareness, bring people together, work with everything from youth organizations to movement builders to corporations to faith leaders. We have a multi-faith partnership that we've been building over the last year. The Vatican spoke at our forum last September when we launched at the United Nations headquarters. So it's going to take a blend of everyone.
All right, and are you able to, is there any, I guess, attempt to track, like you think about 2050, you mentioned 25 gigatons and such,
Yep.
but like it must be a great media tool too to sort of say, look, we are starting to restore X amount. Is that sort of like in the short-term goals so people can kind of follow along with what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, one of our short-term goals, I mean, like with everything, we have to raise the resources for it, but we're working with Global Silicon Valley Labs on a solutions exchange that would actually track some of the different companies that are coming online and other solutions, again, technological and natural, and how much carbon they're removing on an annual basis. That would hopefully drive more investment, drive more markets, and also, inspire more companies and organizations to be working on carbon removal. So that hopefully we will launch that over the next year. But again, for us, we want to make sure that we're working in partnership. So I said when I took this job in July of last year, I want this to be a 10-year gig, and that we're out of business in 2030 because the world is on such a path we'll move on to something else, but we won't need to be out there saying people have to focus on climate restoration and carbon removal, because it will have happened.
I feel like I follow the climate movement pretty well, but I mean, why do you think it is that it seems like everyone's sort of resigned that once that carbon's up there, we're just going to leave natural processes to bring it out over centuries or thousands of years, but the notion of like really aggressively kind of bring it out. I mean, I know there's some groups, geoengineering, that are talking about that, but you seem to be this comprehensive approach to make that an important issue. I mean, why do you think it hasn't like really captured the climate movement's attention enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've done a really great job in the climate community, and I say all of us, of really waking the world up. It's taken years, but waking the world up to the climate crisis. I think, though, that people are a couple of things, that they have been so frightened, rightfully so, but so frightened that people become paralyzed and say, we've got a plan, mitigation, adaptation, 1.5 degrees, just let's keep our head down and do it. Well, no, that's not the answer. Let's do that, of course. But this third piece, what I run into is over the last year is that people that are in the climate space and they say, wait, no, not yet. We'll do that in 2050. Well, why? Why would we wait? Isn't mankind have the ability to rapidly deploy things? I mean, I've had people say, well, we have to be careful. We can't do any of these solutions because we might do more harm than good. No, we should test. And I've had other people say, well, isn't that geoengineering? Well, yes, as a bad term, but don't we do bioengineering every single day? I mean, how many open heart surgeries do we do? And how many medications? How about all this? And if we are willing to do this kind of engineering on the human body, don't we owe that at least to the atmosphere that we live in?
I don't know if you followed it, and there's a whole initiative, the Trillion Tree Initiative, that's going on in some of the big groups, and it was interesting seeing some of the chatter because some of the climate scientists weighed in. They're just like, "Hey, that's great, but that's not really going to kind of take it out of the atmosphere like you think. It'll almost be like decomposition of the trees, and trees aren't necessarily your best way to kind of do it. Are trees a part of your strategy?"
Yeah, no, let me just say that I will never knock any other strategy that is working to restore the climate, no question. Are trees permanent? When we say permanent, we say a century, just to give it as an idea of, okay, this needs to be more than 10, 15, 25 years. And, for the most part, that's not where trees are. And as you know, there's a lot of different things around a tree planting versus tree. I'm trying to think of one of our partners that, as he calls it, it's a form of tree growth. When you look at trees and what does it do to help the surrounding environment and the soil and the jobs and all of that. So no, I mean, one of our great friends at One Earth, they're working on a tree initiative, and it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. But it, again, is a part of the overall tapestry that we're all trying to weave together.
Yeah, in regards to sequestering carbon, yes, certainly short term. I'm all for planting trees, wildlife habitat, cooling of global temperatures that are going to go up. So it's great. Please plant those trillion trees. But I think it's interesting to sort of debate as part of the kind of the focus of what you're doing with restoration, how much of a role that's going to play. I got another question here for you from Islamul. How much should we invest primarily on climate restoration, and how? I bet you have a good idea for this. And how should we connect with the public in this regard to make this thing work?
How much do we invest in climate restoration? Almost nothing. Now, again, there are, carbon engineering and global thermostat, and there's other companies that are coming online that have some solutions. And so there are private investment dollars there. As far as if you take government investments, pretty much zero. One of my requests to people when they say, well, how can I get involved? Act, use your voice, and your voice is your vote. So vote for candidates that care about climate and that care about climate restoration. I have talked to many people on all sides of the aisles about climate restoration. And when they have that aha moment of, wait a minute, this carbon will still be in the atmosphere. Who's not telling me about this? Then they say, well, of course I want to engage on this. Of course I want to restore the climate. I mean, one of our board members likes to say, who doesn't want to restore the climate? Well, nobody doesn't want to restore the climate, but it's really hard work. And yeah, of course, slightly controversial, but again, we just feel like we have to just go for it.
Well, what about policy work? I think of, there's
Yeah.
a lot of effort to try to create a carbon tax, and it's going to be a challenge here in the United States, but it could. You never know. It could happen like this. And a lot of times when they design those carbon taxes, oh, that's going to go as a rebate to consumers. Here's your kind of money back. But do you see a place for climate restoration? It's like, well, maybe 10% of it should go a dedicated funding source. Do you get into that kind of policy discussions?
Oh, sure. But I think that if we wait for that, we'll be sitting here in
Mhm.
2050 with 95% of the carbon still in the atmosphere. So I hope all that catches up. But I think that our job is to create the kind of political pressure, the kind of, the peer pressure. I also think that the days of not every company, but I think the days of boardrooms and C-suites filled with executives that don't care about the environment, they're looking at their children and grandchildren, and they want to do this. So the more that we can create the ecosystem, the space, the communications, our forum that we're doing at the UN in September, we launched last September at the UN, and we had about 700 people, and it was a really engaging discussion. And so we're doing it virtually this year, as you can imagine. And for us, it's about, we need to walk people through climate restoration. And so our forum is going to have the first session on science and just sort of build the base of what are we talking about here. And then the second is going to be, okay, so what are the solutions that are out there that are tested, and what are coming online? And then what's the investment opportunity? Our partner, Thunderbird University at Arizona State, we launched at the World Economic Forum this past January a report that shows there's about a $1.5 trillion annual economic opportunity here between now and 2030, 2035. And then finally, who wants this? And so what you'll hear from at our forum is faith leaders, youth groups, networks like Earth Day Network, investors like Baruch Ventures, several different kinds of partnerships coming together saying, we want this. And there are solutions. We just have to choose to do this.
All right, I got some more questions coming in. We're getting towards the end of our episode here, but let's just jump back to some of these. What are some good examples of rapid solutions we could deploy right now? What do we need to do to make those happen?
I think that we have an initiative. I'll give you a really good one that ties several things together. We have an initiative that we launched with Santa Clara County in January of this year, the local government's initiative calling for climate restoration at the local level. And so Dave Cortese passed and the board passed a resolution making their county the first climate restoration county local government in the world. What that means is their planning, their procurement, all that moving forward will require them to look at climate restoration solutions. And so you can imagine that if municipalities across the globe, and we're now starting to talk to cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen and Milan, they're all starting to talk about climate restoration. Imagine if all of these local localities could require carbon negative building materials, not just concrete, but aluminum is starting, very, very small, but aluminum is starting to look at this. So if you had carbon negative building materials and then grow that market around it so that they have the materials, that again, over the next 10 years could scale to thousands and thousands of locations around the world and move tons and tons and tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. That's just one.
All right, well, I want to get a couple more of these questions before I let you go. And Kayla asked, does the foundation work with Project Drawdown? I feel like this could be a great collaboration.
Yes, we are friends with and have had several meetings with Paul Hawkins and Drawdown itself. Again, yes, but we don't have any implementation. And I should say that we are not an implementing foundation. We are absolutely advocacy communications and movement building. So yes, and I've talked to Paul several times. I went out and met him near his house when we first started the foundation. And he was another one who said, wow, 300, unbelievably aggressive. You go for it. I'm at 350, but if you can get to 300, go for it. And it's a great partnership.
The Nobel Prize if you get to 300, so keep at it. I'm going to get one more question, and then we're going to have to kind of wrap it up here. But Ken asked, can you give some examples of restoration projects that could be part of the Green New Deal? Have you seen a role for yourself in the Green New Deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, back to if we could do federal procurement to have the requirement for carbon negative building materials and roads would be one piece of it. Again, if there was a carbon tax that we could have a set aside for restoration. And then if there was an investment pool there that would help spark investment in new technologies and drive research, which is a huge one. Many of the universities are incentivized to stay in the mitigation adaptation lane because there's not funding right now for climate restoration research. And so we need to grow that.
Okay, so I do need to wrap this up. This just blew by, but I want to kind of end on a note where next stages for you. You'd mentioned this virtual conference that you're putting on. Is there any way that other people can participate, or after the fact, kind of learn from it? What do you recommend there?
I would encourage everyone to join us. Go to f4cr.org and you can sign up. It will be again, virtual over September 15 and 16. They will be bite-sized, so each one of the sessions will be 1 hour. Some really world-class people talking with a mixture of some local from on-the-ground examples. So, and that's where we will launch our Road to Glasgow, working with multiples of partners over the next year to try and bring climate restoration to COP26 in Glasgow in November of 2021. So f4cr.org, go sign up and join us on 15 and 16. Everyone is welcome.
We have a wall here for each of our episodes. We'll include all that information as part of that, so people can see that.
Fantastic.
Well, Rick, this is fantastic. And I'm going to take you into just chatting just for a couple more minutes, but I want to close out the episode. But thanks for what you're doing and good luck to you. The world is counting on you. So thanks for coming on.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
All right, just a second.